This is Esco Trails, and we're working today on our mini sign kit. It's a 9x9 square sign, and they come in a multitude of designs. Today I'm going to show you a design that says "Be Still and Know," which is one of my favorites, but you probably have one there that makes you awfully excited to do this as well. So hopefully that during this time of uncertainty and a little bit of stress and anxiety, that this will help bring some creativity into your life and relieve some of that stress. Provide a little fun with your family and just enjoy this time. The first thing we're gonna do, obviously, is you wanna grab your board and the instructions that are provided, and we'll just move through the video following those instructions. And so if you need to stop and pause the video, which you certainly will, you can definitely do that, or you could watch it all ahead, either one. So whatever works for you, but the first step is going to be to prep your board. So we'll go forward. So this is the paint your background part, the very first step in the process. And so you're gonna start out with a sanded board. So make sure that you find the sanded side. And then go ahead and take your paint, grab mine here, and use the baby wipe that's provided and wipe it on just like you're staining a board. So if you've ever stained a board, just wipe it on like this. It's not difficult. This process, rather than using a brush, it leaves less brush marks. So when you're doing your stencil design, you don't have as many leakages underneath your stencil, and it also dries quicker. For whatever reason, it dries really quickly when you do this. So wipe it on, just like I'm doing here. Don't forget to get your edges. And this, I'm using white currently, and with white, you're probably gonna need at least a coat, at least a couple of coats. With some of the other colors, especially darker colors, you may only actually need one coat. So you'll find that it dries very quickly, so you can probably give it another coat in just a couple of minutes. And then after you do this step, you want to make sure that you allow your sign to dry for probably a good, I said 30 minutes in the instructions. In my classes, we certainly don't wait that long, but we also work on other things during those 30 minutes, and so it may actually end up being 30 minutes. But the longer you let it dry, the better it's going to be for applying your stencil. So I would give it 30 minutes, take a break, have a snack, do whatever you need, and come back to the project. So you can see, that's my first coat. I'll probably wait maybe 2 minutes and put a second coat on, and then let it dry for a good 30 minutes. All right, the next step is to sand your board and apply the vinyl. So you have a piece of purple sandpaper, hopefully it's purple, and you just run it over really lightly. Maybe it should take 3 minutes, something like, or 3 seconds, something like that. It's not really to sand any paint off. It's just to get all the dust particles or any of the grain that raised up while you were painting it off. So super lightly, like I said, just go back and forth, like almost use zero pressure. And then if you wanted it to be a little bit more distressed, you could certainly sand it more and have more of the grain show through. That's definitely an option too. But then when you're done, use just a plain old paper towel and wipe off the dust. At that point, you're ready for your stencil. So you've got it. I usually just set it on my board, and then I take the popsicle stick that's provided and rub over the top of your stencil like this. And what this does is it takes all 3 layers of your stencil and kind of compresses them together so it sticks. Because what we're going to do is flip it over and take the backing off, and you want all the little pieces and parts to stick to that very top piece of transfer tape. So once you have it done, if you have little pieces, go a little bit more carefully over those and it will make peeling the back of your stencil off a lot easier. Then I flip it over. I still have it on top of my board at this point. I just always kind of do that. And then I have 3 layers: the backing, the blue stencil, and the top piece of transfer tape, which is just like a big piece of masking tape. And I pull it off. If there's any little pieces that come up, which sometimes happens, I just lay my thing back down, my backing back down, and use my finger to really press down the area that came up. And then I keep going. Now I have something sticking, I can feel it, so I'm gonna turn and pull it from a different direction. Now where I have little pieces of letters, I just be real careful as I'm pulling it off so that I don't pull any of those off with it. And if the little pieces would happen to come off on your backing, don't worry about it. Set it aside, apply your stencil, and then take a safety pin or something sharp and pull them off and put them onto your board. It's just easier than trying to get it to stick to your transfer tape. So at this point I'm gonna kind of lightly lay it on my board. The edges of your stencil should match up, the blue stencil should match up with the edges of your board. So I think I have it where I want it. And at this point, I'm gonna take my fingers and press it down. I won't use the popsicle stick at this point because if I would, it just seems to stick too much to the board. And then when you pull it off, it can pull some of your background paint with it. So at this point, then what I do, once I have it secured down, is I start to pull the corner of the transfer tape off. And I had a little piece there that came up with my design, and so I'm gonna stick it back down. Sometimes little pieces can be problematic, but basically just get them down, and you can always fix them once the transfer tape is off. So I'm just gonna pull. And I find that if you pull straight back, like the transfer tape is folded back on top of itself, it seems to go a little bit better. Like I said, this part is probably the part that causes most people the most frustration. And in the end, it's really not, if you get your stencil down pretty well, it's not a big deal. You can always move things around, especially the little pieces and parts, move them around just a little bit when you're done. So I have it off. At this point, then I take my finger and adjust anything that might have come up. I go around the little letters, and if anything looks like there's a bubble, I kind of just press it out. Sometimes you can use the back of your fingernail to, if there's a little bit of a bubble, to get that stuck down. But at this point, you're ready for paint. So when you're ready to paint, I basically have my paint ready in one of my makeup sponges, and I dip the edge, I dip the wide edge of the paint, or of the makeup sponge, in the paint. And I try to wipe off as much as I can. So it's just wet, not gloppy. And I even dab straight up and down on an area of my design that's not an open part to get off the excess paint. So, and then what I do is I take it and I go straight up and down using very quick and light motions. And it's better to do really light coats and do more. So this gray, this charcoal gray, covers very well. So if I was really careful and got all the little white spots, I could probably get it to cover in one coat. Most of the time I do two light coats, but you don't want to have paint glop all over because it will seep under your stencil and then the edges of your letters won't be great. Now, if you are nervous about your design in an area where it's really close, I sometimes have painter's tape, and I just move it around to make sure that I don't go into the other area. If you do go into the other area, don't worry about it. Just wait until that area is dry and then paint it with the other color. So it's not a big issue. almost always you can go back over it, but sometimes having the painter's tape available is kind of handy, because like down in this corner, it's just really tight. So I'm going to just stick it down, and that way I don't have to worry too much about it. I'm going to finish this up and I'll be back. At this point, I have finished both colors, and my paint is actually still wet a little bit, but that's okay. Sometimes if you allow it to dry too much, it can create sort of a film between your painted part and your stencil. And so you notice that I just pulled the stencil off, and then when I get to the parts that are less easy to access, I guess, I use a safety pin. You can use a little stick pin or a needle or whatever you have at home, and just kind of find the edge and pluck under and kind of pull it up. And you just, it may come in pieces depending on how thin your stencil was at certain places in the design. So you may have to do that little pluck. So I have all of my stencil removed. I used the little safety pin to grab the little insides of the letters. And you can see that mine isn't perfect. None of them ever are. It's just, they're handmade. So what I do though, instead of trying to touch up with the paintbrush, or with a paintbrush, I typically use just my safety pin that I use to kind of pull the vinyl up. And if you just take the tip and scrape away a little bit of the paint that has seeped under your stencil, if you have any issues, it's easier to do that. I hope you can see it. Easier to do that with just a little safety pin. If you try to touch it up with a paintbrush, which you can, it just seems like it ends up leaving like paint that doesn't match, or it just never ends up looking quite as good. And so what you can do is scrape this away if there are any little spots that drive you nuts. And then if you want to go back after you scrape away as much as you can try to touch up with a really fine tipped paintbrush. But this board has just a little knot there, so there is a part that's not exactly perfect, but when you pull it back and look at it, you never really notice it. So there we have it. That's the most stressful part. So now you've seen what your sign is going to look like. It looks awesome. If you want to distress anything at this point, you can use your purple sandpaper. If you want to, one of the things that sometimes people do is they take just a little bit of paint, and if you want to add a little bit to the edge, you can certainly, go around and just do a little bit of feathering on the edge. It gives it just a little bit more maybe interest, but you don't want to do too much. Totally up to you. So some people add a little bit of character. One of the things you can do is you can get it on there and let it dry for a little bit, and then sand it off, so you can go back and kind of sand it. Just some different things to kind of make your sign, stand out just a little bit. If you don't like it, then, sand it off. But certainly some things you can do at the end to kind of make it a little bit more interesting. If you wanted to, I'm not going to distress this one, but if you wanted to, distress it, you could certainly do that too. So thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you and your family have enjoyed this, and I'd love for you to share my Facebook page or my website with others who you think might be interested as well. Thanks again. Surprise, it's me again. after I did the video, I decided that I actually did really like the distressed look. I played around a little bit more with the edges, and then I decided to distress my sign a little bit. So I thought I'd show you quickly how I did that. So I take my purple sandpaper and I just kind of wrap it around my finger, and I basically go with the grain of the wood, and this is after allowing it to dry for several hours, because if you do it when it's wet or even just remotely wet, it won't work as well. So let it dry for several hours, and then I basically just kind of sand back and forth, and it may scare you because you may see some of it kind of like the red run onto the white, like right there. Just know that if you take a paper towel, that should wipe right off. So in the end, I went with the grain of the wood. So go in one direction. If your grain of the wood goes this way, then do it that way. If it goes this way, do it this way. Don't go like all over, or it won't look distressed. It'll just look like a mess. So follow the grain of the wood, like it actually is like an old piece of wood that's just, you know, kind of taking a beating. So just keep working at it, and yeah, just decide, you know, eventually you have to stop. So sometimes my signs evolve a lot and maybe don't end up exactly how I had envisioned them in the beginning, and that's great. So go ahead, play around, do whatever you think, and yeah, hope you enjoyed. Thanks.